Hey, Matt, how you doing?
Chris, I'm doing all right, brother. How about yourself?
Good, not too bad, not too bad. Thanks for joining. Thanks for agreeing to the debate. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I definitely don't want to mislead any of you or any of your listeners. So anyone who's not aware, Matt, not an expert, not a scientist, just a run of the mill animal lover who met Chris on LinkedIn.
Okay, that's interesting. You call yourself an animal lover, hey?
That's right. I'm sure we'll get into that. I love animals, man. Eat them every day.
All right, well, there you go. That's one way of doing it, I suppose. Um, okay, well, do you have something that you'd like to. Do you have like an opening statement or something that you'd kind of like to run through? I've got a little brief 5 minute slides to go through at the start.
I'm happy to let you go first if you'd like. I can kind of try to match your tone, or what you're going through. But if you'd like me to go first, I'm happy to as well. I don't have anything long. Maybe just maybe kind of a minute introduction on me and why I've adopted the lifestyle I do.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, let's do that. Let's like hear a bit about you and your background before we get into the debate. Yeah, want to say a few words?
Sure, yeah. So my name's Matt. I live in the Southeast U.S. I assume most of your audience is European or British, but I'm sure you probably have folks across the planet as well. Yeah, I've been living here my whole life. Raised with probably what would be considered the standard American diet. Do y'all use the term SAD, like the acronym? Because
I'm familiar. Yeah.
okay, the health movement over here, like MAHA and everything, you're hearing it more and more. I don't know if it's a good term or a bad term, but it's one I use. So I was definitely raised in the 90s on Gushers and Dunkaroos and Fruit by the Foot and McDonald's and all that fun stuff. Thankfully, I didn't balloon up to 200 pounds like a lot of kids and have a face full of zits, but definitely was not metabolically healthy or fit. Just kind of living a normal life. About 10 years ago, I started really taking my health seriously. I've read some works by predominantly Paul Saladino is probably the best known individual. Are you familiar with him, Chris?
Yes, I am. I heard that
Okay.
he quit Carnivore recently.
Yeah, he has evolved. So I heard about him through his book, The Carnivore Cookbook, which is a 100% meat-based diet, and how to cook with meat and how to make things interesting. He has evolved. His position is probably as close to mine as I can find it among a mainstream figure. So he's animal based. You'll hear the term AB diet. That's definitely what I promote as well. I do eat the odd donut because I'm a freaking human being, and Christmas comes and a slice of pie on the table is attractive. But the diet I aspire to, the diet I'm raising my four children on, the diet me and my wife are living on, is best described as an AB diet, animal based diet. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, what it means is animal products are a large source of our macros, fats, proteins, carbs, calories, meat, eggs, milk, cheese, dairy, those things. The occasional organs, I'm trying to eat more liver and heart, but man, I hate the taste and the texture of liver and heart.
Hmm. Yeah, sounds great.
Um, it's looks weird when it's in whole chunks, and it tastes odd when it's cut up into bite-sized chunks. But I do believe it's nature's multivitamin, especially the liver part. But the other part of animal based, where we'll probably find a lot of agreement. Um, I like the word carnivore; it's a cool word, but ultimately, I do believe humans are omnivores, of course, and so I do love and cherish the fruits in my life. So we eat a lot of fruits. Um, I eat a little bit of grains, a little bit of veggies, but certainly as I wouldn't even call it supplemental. I would decorative is probably or ornamental is probably too light of a word, but somewhere between supplemental and and ornamental on the plate. We'll put some leaves in here and there, some bread here and there. But that's kind of a snapshot on who I am and kind of the diet that I espouse that me and my wife are leading our family with, and my four little carnivores. So yeah, last caveat: if one of them barges in that door because they find the key somehow, all bets are off, and you might get two animal based folks on this call, not just one. But I told the kids, hey, can you give Dad an hour or so because it would mean a
All
lot.
right. No, no double teaming. Okay. Um. Okay, nice. Well, do you want to, if you have kind of something more than that, like prepared to say as a case for animal-based diet, do you want to go straight into that, and then I can give my piece?
Sure. And I tried to make a few notes, but again, I'll just reiterate. And I think I was honest with you about this. I think I'm not deceiving anyone on my LinkedIn profile. Not a scientist, not a nutritionist, just someone who's read a lot of books, who's found a position that I think I can defend fully, even if we have a lot of disagreement on it. I think I can give a good, fair assessment of it. You mentioned that it's hard to get um, some folks on the show who have my position, so I was happy to be one of those folks. I'm certainly not the best of them, but I'm a sincere one. And if I attack your position, I promise I won't attack you and like throw dumb names and stuff because that's not my style. But yeah, so like I said, I guess the basic premise is that certainly nutrition is more important than just calorie count. I know bioavailability. I think I heard you mention that word right when I logged on. That's a huge part of my position is not just can we eat things with the most nutrients in them, but how many nutrients are actually being absorbed, right? I would rather have 10 micrograms of vitamin D fully absorbed than 100 grams absorbed at 10%, because that means it's the same outcome, 10% absorption or 10 grams absorption, but there's a lot of filler. Like why eat filler, right? So I always seek what is the most nutrient dense bioavailable food that I can find for myself and for my children. I do believe that there's some interesting gut science, whether you come at it from an evolutionary um, perspective or you come at it from an intelligent design perspective, and I'm on that side. I do believe in God. I think either way, though, I think personally, I've found the case very compelling for how ruminants and what you could call polygastric, but that's not really a term. It's a term I like because it sounds better as opposed to monogastric aminals. I think how ruminants can naturally contain cellulase and herbivores naturally contain cellulase enzymes in their digestive tract, and humans do not. I think speaks broadly to why they thrive on grass and grain and vegetable diets as herbivores, and we do not as humans. Um, there's a book I love quoting, but it's actually a shame for me to quote it because I've never read it. But there's a dentist named Weston Price who traveled the world in the 1910s, 1920s. Are you familiar with Dr. Weston Price, Chris?
No, I'm not.
He had a really interesting slice of history in the window shut, but he traveled the world right at the beginning of commercial aviation. So he was a dentist. He studied jaws and bone structure and teeth, primarily not whole human physiology. But he studied teeth of regions that were not interconnected in the way that today McDonald's is on every country and on every continent, and ultra processed foods, which I think we have some disagreement on, have now pretty much reached the four corners of the planet. He did a huge survey of human mouths in the early 19 teens or 20s, back before that was the case. And I think what he found was East African herdsmen and Inuit were some of the healthiest people he surveyed. And one of the similarities between those groups is that they had a 90% plus meat diet, especially Inuit, because you can't grow things in the cold, right? You have to, you're either dead or a carnivore if you live, up in the polar regions of the world, Siberia, Alaska, Yukon territory. For those very fringe societies, there's no way to plant, there's no way to harvest in permafrost. It doesn't mean it's true for everyone, but it's compelling evidence. But yeah, Weston Price wrote a great book. One of these days, I need to freaking read it instead of just quoting it and citing it, because like I said, have not read it. I've read many reports on it and people have cited it, but I need to go to the source one of these days. But I think that's a good survey. Again, my North Star is always what helps humans be healthiest. It's one of the reasons I'm disinterested in the debates on does shifting to a plant-based diet help the climate. That may be true, that may be false. I'm happy to let you lead in that conversation, but it's disinteresting to me. I think I have my answer. My answer is I think it's better for the planet than worse, but I think if I'm wrong on that, I don't change my nutritional stance. The nutritional stance is simply what diet leads to human flourishing. I want to consume that diet. So bioavailability, nutrient density, and human flourishing, human health, longevity and health span. those are some of my North Stars.
Okay, nice. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing. I was looking a little bit at your background, and I appreciate that you are coming to this not, as a non-scientist, and like I say, you've been open about that. So I think it's good to have that on the table. And I think one of the things that I'm looking to achieve in this debate, if I go ahead and share my slides here that I'm going to go through, is to lay out why I think some people are getting it wrong in this respect. And ultimately, I think that a lot of this is quite understandable why one would get it wrong, because there are some things which feel quite intuitive but are nevertheless incorrect. Pardon me, if I can work out my slides here. Okay, good. Things that feel quite intuitive but nevertheless incorrect, right? So, for example, looking at what kind of diets humans, goodness me, humans were eating throughout evolution and stuff like that, I think is going to lead some people astray, even though it can be quite intuitive that would equate to a healthy diet, right? That's a lot of people feel that makes sense on some level. So this is the hierarchy of evidence. Are you familiar with this? You've seen this kind of thing before?
I'd never heard of it till you sent it to me. So again, we're a bit outside my domain of expertise. So yeah, I saw this for the first time a month ago on LinkedIn.
Okay, nice. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I had a version of this, I guess. And it's good. It's a good place for us to start this debate, I think, because it's going to tell us like what matters when we're trying to answer the question as to what kind of diet supports human flourishing, as we're framing it, and what doesn't. So this is the hierarchy of evidence. You've got basically weaker evidence at the bottom and stronger evidence towards the top. And I'll kind of explain each of these as we go through rather than at the start. But my basic contention is that you can find some evidence in favor of animal-based diets here at the kind of lower levels of the hierarchy of evidence, and I'll mention some of the things that you've mentioned as well. But that ultimately, if you look towards the top of the hierarchy of evidence in terms of actual robust scientific evidence that would be considered in making evidence-based medicine decisions, for example, it is overwhelmingly favors plant-based diets being healthier. So at the bottom, the most basic level, and this actually, I've made this because this doesn't appear on some hierarchies of evidence. I guess that rather than evidence, this is really more like theory. So mechanistic speculation, like stories about why things might be a certain way. So this includes things like evolution, ancestral diets, right? Human physiology, people talk about like our teeth and our intestines and stuff like this. Nutrient density, bioavailability, and ultra processing. These are all theories. That's not to say that they're wrong, but some of them, could be right or could be wrong with respect to any given question. But they are just like a story about why we might expect certain outcomes related to plant-based or animal-based diets. So again, it's some hierarchical evidence don't include this level because it's just theory. It's not any kind of evidence. So slightly upwards from that, we have case reports, or sometimes case series, which will be individual anecdotes, or maybe like a handful of people having anecdotes. So, for example, individual anecdotes of having more energy, improved mood, mental clarity, digestive release, weight loss, even things which are very tangible, like no longer needing medications, or like measurements of cholesterol or something like that. If it's only one case report, it is not really telling us anything useful about how much we can expect that to occur more broadly. It's basically just an anecdote. There's no control group, there's no follow-up. The main problem is that you can just appeal to counter anecdotes.
That's right.
So, you could say that somebody goes carnivore and they feel like they have some sort of health benefits from it. I can just say I know somebody who went carnivore and they had health problems from it, right? It doesn't really get us anywhere in terms of actual evidence. So that's case reports. Up from that, we've got cross-sectional studies. And as far as I can tell, this is kind of where the evidence in favor of carnivore animal-based diets tops out in this hierarchy. This is kind of as far as it goes in terms of good news for your side of the debate, if we can put it that way. This one particular paper is a survey. So cross-sectional is just one snapshot in time, right, as opposed to following a group over time. This is a survey where people reporting various health outcomes related to following a carnivore diet in this case. And it says participants reported high levels of satisfaction and improvements in overall health, well-being, various medical conditions, and median BMI. So this is people reporting in a survey, they went carnivore and they had these kind of health benefits. In this case, it's self-reported outcomes, so you have some like potential for measurement error. It's also self-selected, so this is basically an online survey that's distributed in like carnivore forums and stuff like this. And again, there's no control group, so you can't really attribute any causality from this.
That's right.
So as far as I can tell, that is pretty much where the pro-animal-based diet evidence tops out. Then looking further up, we have case control studies where the idea here is that you have some positive cases of, for example, people who have colorectal cancer in this case, and then controls of people who are in the same hospital, for example, but don't have colorectal cancer. And then they look back and they ask about their kind of lifestyle factors. So in this particular study, they found that adherence to plant-based diets was associated with a lower risk of colorectal cancer, whereas adherence to unhealthy plant-based diets was associated with a higher risk of colorectal cancer compared with the lowest quantile adjusted QRs. Well, I'm not going to read all of this, but basically you have some sort of controls here, right? You have some people who do have colorectal cancer, you have some people who don't, and then you ask them retrospectively what kind of diet they're following and so on. Now, this is a little bit stronger because you do have some, like a control group to compare to, but it also is still relying on people remembering retrospectively what they were eating, and so, you know, there's some kind of problems with are they going to remember that and so on. So up from that, then you have prospective cohort studies. This is the dreaded epidemiology. I know that lots of animal-based diets, people like to take objection to epidemiological studies, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit. And these overwhelmingly show substantial benefits from less meat consumption and from plant-based diets. Mainly, the big three are to do with cardiovascular disease, heart disease, cancer, and overall mortality, meaning just like more of this cohort died in the period of the study. So yeah, we can get into some of the criticisms that people have about prospective cohort studies, but I'll try and go through these relatively quickly. So yeah, in this particular study, there was 15% lower risk of overall mortality in lacto-ovo vegetarians, 9% lower in pesco vegetarians, 19% less, and in semi-vegetarians, 8% less compared with non-vegetarians. So this is like a large group of people. There are, I think in this one, 60,000 people followed over a course of many years. I believe this cohort's still going and is now up to the most recent studies, like 18 years following these people. And they are reporting what they're eating, and they're also kind of part of the study before they have any of the health outcomes that we're looking for. So it's a bit more solid in terms of inferring causality compared to looking back, because you know that you've got the temporal piece in there. It's coming, you know, the diet's coming before the disease, right? Yeah, very large groups of people. So again, it's quite nice and generalizable. Then above that, well, some people will say, you know, there are problems with epidemiology because it's observational and it's not experimental, and you can't necessarily infer causation from that. And we can talk about that a little bit. So above that, you have randomized control trials. This is like experiments where we're going to say we're going to have some people following a vegan diet, some people following an omnivore diet. And then we are quite sure that all the other factors are kind of controlled for, because we can randomize people into the vegan group or the non-vegan group. And therefore, we can say with an increased degree of certainty this is like causal of the change. So that's randomized controlled trials. This is like an experiment where we can look at health outcomes or health markers over time from people consuming the different types of diets. And again, that's a bit more robust for inferring causality. So in this study, this is actually a twin study, so there's another like factor controlled for in here. The twins randomized to the vegan diet experienced significant decreases in LDL cholesterol, in fasting insulin levels, and in body weight. So that's randomized controlled trials. And I've got another example here, just this is one of my favorite studies on plant-based meat alternatives. So swapping out red meat for plant-based meat alternatives. And again, we've got significant reductions in LDL cholesterol and also in TMAO, which is another marker for heart disease. One issue that we do have with the RCTs in the dietary world is that they're usually quite short term, because it's not practical to randomize people like, you're going to be randomly allocated to go vegan for the rest of your life, right? It's just not really practical to do that. So they'll usually be maybe 12 weeks or 8 weeks, or they're a little bit shorter basically. So some of the health outcomes, you don't necessarily have time to observe people dying of a heart attack in that amount of time, right? So that's why in this case it's looking at health markers instead. And then right at the very top, you have systematic reviews and meta-analysis. So this is where basically it encompasses the levels below. So you can have systematic reviews of randomized control trials, where they'll search in a systematic way for randomized control trials that have happened on this particular topic, and then aggregate them in the case for meta-analysis, where they can say, there's been 20 different studies on this topic, right? And overall, across cohorts, they've shown this. They can also do that with cohort studies in epidemiology as well. So this is like the strongest form of evidence at the top of the hierarchy. And this particular review shows plant-based diets associated with 18% lower risk of type 2 diabetes, 10% lower risk of cardiovascular disease, 12% lower risk of cancer, and 16% lower risk of overall mortality. And I think this is the last one that I have in here. I'm going to have to zoom in on this a little bit. So this is goodness me. This is a systematic review of...
That's zoomed in.
Yeah, that's pretty zoomed in. This is a systematic review of swapping out meat for plant-based meat again. And here we're seeing consistent reductions in LDL cholesterol, in total cholesterol, and also in body weight. So I have just a couple more. Oh, I guess I have one more. Okay, yes, this is a scoping review that I found. So this is not quite on the level of a systematic review, but this is a review that I found relating to a carnivore diet. And you may have looked at some of this evidence. There's not that much of it. There's only 9 human studies identified to include in the review, and that's kind of all types of studies. And it says that there's a very, very small, basically limited quality of evidence, small sample sizes, short study durations, absence of control groups. So this is not just looking at RCTs. It says that the carnivore diet may offer short-term health benefits, but carry substantial risk of nutrient deficiencies, reduced intake of health-promoting phytochemicals, and the development of cardiovascular disease. At this time, long-term adherence to the carnivore diet cannot be recommended. So this is the only review that I could find on the topic of carnivore diet. And it's basically saying there's some evidence, weak evidence of short-term health benefits, but basically you're increasing the risk that you're going to have a heart attack. And that can happen without any immediate symptoms. You can be increasing that risk without feeling worse in any way or anything like that, right? So, yeah, just to summarize, there's some evidence towards the bottom of the hierarchy for animal-based diets, including things like mechanisms, individual case reports, and that one cross-sectional study. But pretty much everything above that in terms of the hierarchy of evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of a plant-based diet being more health promoting. I've got a link here to the slides so that people can check it out. Hopefully this is going to be a useful resource for people. It's tinyurl.com/animal-versus-plant-diet. So if you want to check that out, you can do that.
Hey Matt,
So
I'm gonna put a few slides together before we talk. That was good stuff. It's more than a couple.
yeah,
I
well,
feel bad didn't bring any slides. Oh.
that's okay. Well, what do you think of all of that? In terms of the hierarchy of evidence stuff, we're talking about evolution and bioavailability and so on.
Mhm.
I would be looking for some evidence at those higher levels of, well, really any health benefits from an animal-based diet.
Sure. Well, like we discussed, I think in DM, I'm not a big studies guy. I mean, I'll look at studies. I'm happy to review them. Pretty much your entire deck here is about which studies are superior, which are inferior. Um, I think studies are kind of like statistics in the sense that numbers don't lie, but people do. And so it's pretty, I think anything can be proved through a properly motivated and properly funded study. I really do. And that might be implicit bias to bring into the conversation. But just like you look at some of the things that I've said and will say as weak evidence, I don't mean to insult. You have a PhD, dude. I have half of a master's degree. You've got your diploma on the back of the wall. I've got board games and a whole lot of books behind me. So I don't. I just I deprioritize the studies because, of course, like over in Europe, y'all might look down your nose at um, who are some of the factions over there that I might have. So, like people like Nigel Farage in the UK or AFD in Germany, right? So the right wing in Europe, I think a lot of them would say the same thing. These studies are all funded by, you know, the the technocrats and the leftists, and in the US it would be big pharma, versus Maha, or et cetera. I really do. It's hard for me to say studies are the most important thing in the conversation. I really like starting the conversation from first principles instead, because I don't think any of us would disagree at all about well-established facts of nature. And if we start there and gain agreement there at the upstream, then it really does deprioritize whatever's in the river delta downstream, what's flowing out. So that's where I look at these and say there's interesting things here. I'm happy to look into them. I would love to look into who funded each of these studies. I think that would be illustrative. And it's the same reason I wouldn't trust a study that was funded by Smithfield and JBS Foods in the U.S. because they run the largest CAFOs in the country, and I don't trust CAFO meat, consolidated area feeding operation. Um, one of the things I applaud you for, I saw on your website for Bryant Research, is that y'all stand up against animals in cages. I don't do that from a moral perspective. I don't believe animals have rights, etc. But I absolutely do it from a health perspective. I believe free range pasture raised animals are healthier, have less cortisol in their blood, and then the products that we consume from them, their milk, their meat, etc. And animals in cages that are shitting on themselves and on the people on the animals in the cages below them, and never seeing sunlight, eating grain instead of their ancestral diets. I think unhealthy animals, sick animals, lead to sick humans. So it is one of the things I applaud you for. I think some of the kids are now in the background, so apologies for that. But yeah, the studies, I really think that big meat could make any study, uh, could prove any outcome, properly motivated, properly funded. And unfortunately, again, it's a fair stance on mine, but I do think your side could do the same thing, and so that's why I deprioritize the studies, with a preference for first principles instead.
Yeah, so maybe I need to. Maybe I haven't done a very good job of explaining why the hierarchy of evidence is kind of relevant and laid out in this way. I think what you're calling first principles is basically vibes and intuition and like what makes intuitive sense from your perspective. And I will say, I was chatting a little bit before you joined, and I think that from my perspective, there is a lot of dietary misinformation out there that relies very heavily on vibes about ultra processed foods and ancestral diets and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
And if you
We
don't,
disagree on seed oils, kind of that same category.
Yeah, I would say so. And I mean, I looked into some of these things, and I kind of thought, let's see, what kind of evidence the anti-seed oils people are talking about here. Like, what kind of evidence is there that seed oils are harmful to human health? And unfortunately, there's really not any, as far as I can tell. Again, I think it's like largely vibes. There's a lot of Instagram influencers or whatever your chosen platform is that talk about these things, and it's easier to interact with than the scientific evidence. But there's a
Can
reason
I?
that
Sorry.
there's a reason that the hierarchy of evidence is set up as it is, because it is just more robust when you design things a certain way. Like, I mean, I could set if we talk about just kind of like theories or stories as to why things might be the way that they are. I could theorize that it might improve your safety to drive without a seatbelt, because maybe then you'll drive very carefully and you'll be less likely to get into an accident. And so, it kind of makes intuitive sense if I say that it's safer to drive without a seatbelt. But of course, it's not. And if you have a randomized control trial of people driving with or without seatbelts, and the people driving without seatbelts are more likely to die, then my theory is kind of worthless. So I think that a lot, and I think that there's a lot of, in particular, young men who are targeted by these kind of like vibe based, natural is healthy and processed foods are bad and seed oils are bad and so on. And honestly, it's kind of grim from my perspective, because some of my mates are in the same algorithm as you are, but there's no they're going to be more likely to die of heart disease and cancer at the end of the day. And I think that that is a bad thing. And I don't, you seem like a nice bloke. I don't want that for you. And I certainly don't want that for your kids. You're
Likewise.
talking about feeding your kids an animal-based diet as well. Like, I would be concerned that you should be like trying to engage with some of the more robust scientific literature. And I understand that not everybody
And to be honest,
is
that is
inclined
why
to
I'm
do
here.
that. Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I understand that not everybody like wants to sit around reading studies all day. And great thing about ChatGPT, for example, you can kind of go to ChatGPT now and say, "Hey, give me an unbiased evaluation of whether a plant-based or an animal-based diet is healthier." And it will do that. It doesn't have incentives. You know that I'm a vegan, and maybe you think that I have a certain bias coming into this, and I'm presenting evidence in a certain way, and so on. Which is, maybe you're right to be skeptical about that. And if you ask ChatGPT, it doesn't have that bias. It's not trying to sell you supplements or anything like this. And I think it's now much more accessible for people to get a real
We
interpretation of the evidence and
we have
be
reached our first disagreement here, by the way, because I think ChatGPT is only as good as its designers, right? I believe it carries the bias of its programmers.
um well, yes, it's certainly true that AI models are like have human values in that sense, but it's going to be pretty good on empirical topics
And
where
it's definitely not trying to sell supplements. You're right about that.
yeah. Well, I mean, perhaps they're bringing in ads and stuff like that, so perhaps that's not given anymore as well. But I think
Yeah,
it's
that
a
day's
good
coming.
thing that like actual evaluation of scientific evidence has become a lot more accessible than it used to be, because not everybody wants to go and read all of the studies and so on, right? But
Right.
it's just the case that things like bioavailability, nutrient density, evolution, like ancestral diets, all this stuff, they're kind of just stories about why things might be a certain way. But I could just as easily tell stories in the other direction. And so it's
That's
important
right.
to look at the evidence and say, okay, what actually do we see when we track large groups of people over time and what they're eating and their health outcomes?
Yeah. Well, can I, and I realized apparently my microphone was on my monitor, not my headset. So I switched that while you were talking before. So I hope my audio is a little bit better now. I did not realize it probably was kind of bad before. Sorry about that.
Nice, no worries. Yeah, sounding good.
Awesome. Yeah. So I guess let me make the case for like when I say first principles, and I believe that's turned into I think that term is in itself inflammatory these days. And I regret that. I don't think it should be. But let me give you a brief case for
like the what I would call the upstream, the first principles, and how we should look at this. When you consider what humans can eat, there's really two broad categories. There's animated food, animals, and then there is inanimate food. There's plants. And everything on Earth, whether you believe it was designed by a designer or it evolved to avoid predation through natural selection, everything on Earth has defense uh, properties, defense mechanisms. So animals, animated food, the way they avoid predation is often running away, making loud noises, biting and kicking, calling for help, howling for your pack or baying for the rest of your herd, etc. And so their defense properties are animation, biting, kicking, screaming, running away, the fight or flight. Now, over on the planted food, inanimate food, how do they defend against predation? Right? Because plants don't want to be eaten. Plants want to spread and grow. And, I live in North Carolina. If you want to Google what does North Carolina look like in March? So I'm about to be an unwilling participant in a pine tree orgy that lasts for 3 or 4 weeks in my state where yellow clouds of pollen float all over the place. That's how that's what plants want to do. They want to mate just like biological mammals do. They're biological creatures. They want to mate with other trees. They want to spread their seed. They want to grow. And so how do they defend against predation when they can't run away? So plants either were designed with or have evolved to include defense chemicals. One of the things I shared with you a few weeks ago, one of the things I sent to you very late, about probably while you're already live, so I apologize for that because that was uncouth. But plants have defense chemicals. That's not a talking point. That's a fact. So there are phytochemicals, there are myotoxins. 10% of almond trees in the wild are fatal to humans. It's one of the reasons humans ended up cooking things to reduce the toxic load in vegetables, roots, stems, barks, leaves. The things that plants can risk death if they lose have defense chemicals in them. Whereas the things that plants want animals to eat, they're fruits. They want to be consumed. It's not predation. They're actually offering it. Why? Because plants want to spread their seed. And if an animal eats an apple with seeds in it or eats a berry with seeds in it, ingested and then excreted, now those seeds are in a pile of fertilizer somewhere farther from the mother plant, giving the plant the best chance to propagate. It's now in a pile of fertilizer. So plants are incentivizing to have their fruits eaten, and they're disincentivizing to have their essential elements, stems, bark, roots, leaves, because the plant can die when those things are eaten. The carrot plant dies when the carrot is harvested. The apple tree does not die when the apple is harvested. So I'll pause there. Again, not a scientist, just a guy that has looked into this and read it and been fully persuaded by it. What do you think of that? What I would call a first principle of one of the reasons animal products do not contain the toxic load and the defense chemicals that the inanimate foods do contain and must be addressed and ameliorated before they're safe for human consumption.
Well, I would just say that if it was the case that plant foods tend to be like more toxic or worse for our health, then we would see evidence that people who consume more plant foods have worse health outcomes. But we don't see that. We see the opposite.
That is a great terse response to a bloviating example.
Well, so I
um,
think this is where the theory is not useless. It can be useful if it aligns with the evidence that we see. Like, I was reading a
well,
bit about.
what have I said that's theory? Can you be just a little bit more clear? I think I gave three propositions. I divided plants in half, fruit products and vegetable products, and I kept animals as a whole. So I'm curious. I thought I was just speaking scientifically. I sent you a WHO article, and I don't think they're a pro-meat organization that listed dozens of toxins in plants. So I'm curious. I thought I was presenting like established facts that we could argue from, but I think you're perhaps
Well,
disagreeing with what I believe are facts themselves.
well, I don't need to disagree with any of it. So it's like your theory is that because we have all this stuff about plants need to defend themselves, and therefore they have toxins, and that's the way that they can do it, and animals run away, right? It's all building towards a theory of why plants would be less healthy to consume, and animals, because they can run away, they don't need to have toxic things, right? The theory would be then that therefore animal foods are healthier than plant foods. And I'm telling you that that is a useful theory if it was explaining some evidence that we saw that people who consume more animals and less plants have worse health outcomes. But if the evidence is opposite to that, then it's like my theory about not wearing a seatbelt making you safer. It's just, oh, well, that doesn't actually line up with what the evidence suggests. So I guess that theory was wrong.
Again, though, Chris, I don't think I presented a theory yet. So I guess let me ask directly: Do you think there are defense chemicals and natural toxins in animal products?
In some animal products, sure, but
Okay.
it wouldn't.
I'm not talking about ultra processed because, man, I do not eat hot dogs. So I fully agree
Yeah.
that like ultra processed. Well, I think that's actually why we're here is talk about ultra processed meat. I mean, in and of themselves, do animals create toxins or carcinogens or defense chemicals in their meat, broadly speaking, or even I guess individually? I'm not aware if they do, but I'm wondering if what your answer to that is.
Well, consuming more animal foods makes you more likely to get cancer. So I don't know if you would frame that exactly as they produce carcinogens as a defense mechanism, or it doesn't really matter. Like exact, but well, we could have a discussion about why that might be, but it just is the case that consuming more red meat, in particular, is going to increase your risk of getting colorectal cancer. Like consuming red and processed meat is going to increase your risk of heart disease. And that's mainly because the saturated fat increases your LDL cholesterol, and then that leads to plaque in your arteries, right? So that is the case based on the evidence that we see. And
Again, you're speaking very definitively here. But I think if everything you just said is correct, I don't think your position can explain why Inuit cultures or First Nations in Canada or those tribes in remote northern Siberia that cannot plant and harvest food. I think there's a evidentiary gap there that could explain how those populations have existed for millennia. They
well,
can't eat plants. They can only eat animal products, seal, beef,
yeah.
etc.
Well, I'm not saying you're going to instantly die if you eat red meat. Like clearly not, right? There can be populations that eat almost exclusively animal products, like Inuits and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But they may also be at higher risk of heart disease and colorectal cancer. Like those aren't mutually exclusive.
There's almost no incidence of heart disease or heart attacks in Inuit culture. The regions that have not been reached by ultra processed foods yet, it doesn't exist. It almost never occurred in the U.S. under folks under the age of 80 until the 1950s.
Yeah,
And we know
I'm not sure how true that is. I know that like Inuits, for example, eating a lot of fish as opposed to red meat in any case. But broadly, when we look at population level studies, like I mean, okay, let's take this back a bit.
sure.
This
is what happens when a first principles guy and a studies guy have a debate, because the studies guy says your first principles are disinteresting to me, and the first principles guy says your studies are disinteresting to me.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, I don't know how else to say this. The evidence suggests that if you're consuming more plants and less animals, you're going to lower your risk of heart disease, cancer, and overall mortality. Like,
some evidence does suggest that. I don't disagree, because I believe you can make a study prove anything if properly motivated and properly funded. You and I both know that big meat production companies, like in the US, we have Smithfield, JBS. I'm not sure if those are also the big names in Europe or not. Hopefully not, because I think they're awful companies. But they also produce studies, right? Big tobacco companies also produce studies saying no long-term negative effects. if you ran a study every day for 365 days at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and your study was, does the moon exist? And you got 100 telescopes and you pointed them up at the sky. After your study was complete, you would say we have over 250,000 data points proving the moon does not exist. Right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can get into like specific criticisms of the evidence that exists, and there are valid conversations that you can have around that and say, well, there's limitations in this way or that way. I would say the funding alone, in any case, is not going to be proof that a study is biased or that a study is wrong. Now, it might be an indication that you want to have a little look more at the details of it if the conclusions very closely line up with what the funder of the study would have wanted the study to say. But you're going to need to actually do some more work to look at why the study is invalid, right? What have they done wrong that led to the incorrect conclusion? But what would you need to see to convince you off the position of eating a ton of red meat and feeding it to your family, given that there's a bunch of, which I don't think you're denying, that there's a bunch of evidence that increases your risk of getting heart disease and colorectal cancer and dying young? Like, does that not concern you that this is the diet that your kids are eating?
The question as asked, no, it doesn't concern me. Like I said, I think anyone could make a study to prove anything. And so when I see studies that contradict the lifestyle I've adopted, I think it's interesting. I'm always looking to learn. And again, I'm willing to be wrong on anything, as long as I'm still following my North Star. My North Star is I want to live a long and healthy life. I want to live to be 100 years old. And so I'm willing to be wrong on anything else. I'm not willing to be wrong on that. I know for a fact that's what I want, right? And so everything else either falls in line with that or is discarded. So I guess you're asking me to argue against myself. That's a good question. I should ask you the same one at some point in this conversation. What would I need to see? I would need to see a proper plan for how the known and proven and unavoidable toxic load of plants is addressed in the preparation process to prepare vegetables, specifically vegetable plants for human consumption, and how those toxins are addressed and eliminated. And even then, we're now only on what I would view as a even playing field, because then once toxins are addressed, the second question is what food has a higher nutrient density and a higher bioavailability, because that's all I care for. I want food with high nutrient density, high bioavailability. I don't care if it's got 1,000 grams of protein if I can't absorb any of it. I'd rather have 10 grams of protein that I can. So that's what I would need to see is how much processing is required, I guess. And the third thing is humans don't have the cellulase enzyme. Humans cannot digest cellulose. And so most plants' nutrients are locked away in cellulose prisons. Herbivores can unlock them because they have the cellulase enzyme. So herbivores have the key to unlock it. We do not. Monogastric animals do not have cellulase. I think some chimps do, maybe bonobos. And they are observed eating grasses and plants and thriving. But mammals without cellulase cannot, no matter what studies prove it or don't prove it, you cannot digest cellulose without the cellulase enzyme. And so that automatically removes any nutrients that are enshrined within cellulose. It removes them from the consideration. That's why animal products win 100 times out of 100, is because the bioavailability and the digestibility and the receptibility of the many nutrients that come in them. So again, it would be two steps for me to flip. Again, with my North Star being human longevity, I would need to see a plan to deal with the toxins in plants that doesn't exist at any scale in animal products. That brings it to a fair playing field. And then from there, we measure bioavailable nutritional load.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you are clearly someone who's motivated by health and in particular by longevity and like not trying to die young.
No.
And
if I die young, I want it to be on a snowboarding incident in like the Alps or something cool like that. I don't want it to be because I picked the wrong diet, damn it.
Yeah, well, that's super interesting because I don't always get this vibe when I speak to people and debate people, but in your case, I kind of do feel that you are motivated by the right things here, and you're just looking at the wrong level of analysis. And we can like talk. I guess we can get into talking a little bit about some of the mechanisms and some of the like other counter stories and theories about why cellulose is not too much of a problem and stuff like this. But I just wanted to be clear for the audience as well that all of this is like at the mechanistic storytelling level. And there's
Well,
not.
I definitely agree with mechanistic, and I will reject label storytelling. So I agree with mechanistic.
Well, I mean, I think that's what it is, right? We're coming up with stories about bioavailability and cellulose, and why the implication of those stories is that therefore animal foods are going to be better for human health. But I'm telling you that if you actually look at the evidence, that's not what we see, and you're kind of saying out of hand that you're not you don't believe any studies because they might be funded by the wrong people. I didn't really know how to argue with that. Honestly, we'll go into some of the mechanistic stuff. But I should, I just want to say you shouldn't feel bad that you don't understand the stuff about the hierarchy of evidence and so on. Like, it's not a given. It's not something that is intuitive to everyone. And there's, there's professors like Frederick Leroy who don't seem to understand this either, and kind of appeal to evolution over meta-analyses of cohort studies, for example. So it's not, I don't think that you're a bad person. I think you've fallen in with the wrong crowd and picked up the wrong vibes, and that you've got
you with the vibes, man. I think I'm sharing chemistry and biology. I don't know that I've shared any vibes yet. Like,
okay, well, we can go into some of the more mechanistic stuff. But yeah, I just want to.
I'm mad. I'll let you drag me into mechanistic. You're at the bottom of my pyramid, dude.
Yeah, dragging me down. But yeah, I just want to make the point for the audience. Like, in similar of these debates, you can say the cool story, bro, right? But where's the evidence? And yeah, in my research for this, honestly, I was going into it. I've never really looked at the carnivore stuff. It's quite interesting to engage with what they must be citing and so on, but like, there really isn't anything as far as I can tell. And then when I was coming to the debate, I was thinking, well, maybe this guy's got the trove of hidden studies that I can't find by Googling, and he's going to hit me with some evidence that I haven't seen before. But it's not negative. There's nothing. There would be
I think I gave you my talking points a week ago. Like, here's what I'll bring.
Right. So there's no evidence then that you're aware of for animal-based diet being healthier. Well,
I definitely would hard disagree with that, right? So I would say I don't know of many studies at all that elevate a carnivore-based diet. I would agree with that statement. Of course, I believe I have overwhelming evidence that a carnivore-based diet has been proven in the longest study on Earth, which is recorded human history. So I definitely I agree there are a few studies that explicitly promote a carnivore or animal-based diet. I do not agree, and I distance myself from the claim. I would call that a straw man attack, Chris. That I don't believe in evidence. Again, like I said, I could run a year-long study with 100 telescopes at noon every single day, and I think I could prove the moon doesn't exist. So that.
Yes, but the way to engage. Pardon me. The way to engage in that's grim. Sorry. The way to engage in no, sorry, my bad. The way to engage and criticize that would be like, okay, let's go to the method section of this study and see how he's describing how the telescopes were set up, and look, it's during the daytime, and we might think that this is some sort of confounding factor and so on. Like, you can engage with the methods and say, this is what the methods are getting wrong, and this is why the results don't hold up as a result of that. Now,
well, you did say it yourself earlier, so you've tried to extract some concessions from me, and I think I've given a few. I think I've resisted a few. I will just confirm. I think I heard you say, and I believe your audience heard you say, you also understand there's no long-term random controlled tests or studies that compare a vegan diet or a plant-based diet or a vegetarian diet, pescatarian diet against a carnivore diet or an animal-based diet. They're almost always short-term over weeks. Some of them go over months. So when I appeal to human history, I don't try to lean on that. I certainly don't use anecdotal evidence because that's a logical fallacy. But we do see millennia of data when we look back that we can use and glean insight from, right? These populations should not exist if a plant-based diet is superior to an animal-based diet. So yeah, just
Well, I
to be
don't think
clear,
there's any
we
reason
both
to
agree
think
no
that.
long-term RCTs comparing whole food animal-based diet versus whole food plant-based diet. Correct? I think you said that.
Yes, just a ton of long-term epidemiology, a bunch of short-term RCTs, and then a bunch of meta-analyses showing superior health outcomes for a plant-based diet.
And I would agree with many of them that the proposition stated was proven. You know, if we went one by one, I'm sure I would agree with some of them, perhaps even many of them. But again, it's kind of a worldview difference where how I think you're treating these studies as the most important thing, and I'm definitely treating biology and chemistry as the most important thing. So it's upstream and downstream, you know.
Okay, so let's talk about. Well, so I mean, I just want to be clear then that the best evidence that we have is consistently showing that plant-based diets are associated with superior health outcomes compared to animal-based diets. Plenty of large cohorts, different parts of the world, over decades, studied higher risk of heart disease, higher risk of cancer, higher risk of overall mortality from people on an animal-based diet. I think we're in agreement on that, right?
If we just swap out the word evidence for studies, I would agree with almost all of that. I think I think I would agree with most of that if you said studies instead of evidence.
Okay. I'm wondering whether to go down that rabbit hole. I think we'll. That seems fine. That seems fine. We can leave that. So and so
Hey,
you.
one of the things I meant to lead with is where we agree, and we DM'd
Mhm.
this. I think we should run through that for the audience. Could we? Could I
We can
ask you? I
do.
think we agree on these things. Could we run through that real quick? I have six.
Yeah, we can do a little bit of that. But I just want to confirm as well. So then the studies that we have,
Yeah.
the best studies that we have, are showing better health outcomes on the plant-based diet, and as far as we're aware, there's no studies showing better health outcomes for an animal-based diet, right?
I've never looked. I wouldn't be surprised if there are not many. I would be shocked if there were none, because that blows one of my theses up that big beef and big animal products are creating those studies. So, but I haven't looked. I'm willing to be proven wrong on that.
Okay, that seems fine as well.
I'm absolutely deferring to you as the expert on like observational I can't even say the word studies. I'm absolutely willing to defer to you as the expert in the room on that.
Okay, that seems fine then. And so, I mean, I have a bit that I can say about evolution, but and we'll get into like we can get into some of the mechanism as well. By the way, we're at an hour already, so I don't know if you have a hard out at all. I think I sent you a meet for
I have to
90
go at
minutes.
9 your time, 5 my time. Yeah,
Okay,
half an
okay,
hour.
in 30 minutes. Okay, yeah, okay. Well, in that case, why don't I say a little bit about the evolution story, and we can. By the way, you mentioned that you're a religious person? Do we believe in evolution over here?
No, I'm one of those intelligent design, young Earth theory guys.
Okay, so
Christian, literalist. Yay.
so where's the reasoning coming from? The ancestral diet, our evolutionary history stuff.
Well, again, I don't advocate for an ancestral diet per se. I think that's too loaded of a term for me to use. I would probably broadly agree with it if laid out point by point, but I don't use the term. You've used it a few times. It's not a term I use because there are some people that like say you should eat raw meat only, right? Unprocessed only, and that vegetables are disgusting because they are themselves all GMO, circus food. So I don't use the term ancestral diet. I'd probably agree with much of it if laid out, but it's not a term I use. For Christians, it's real simple. Like there are many commands in the Bible that, or not commands, but blessings on foods like grains, meat, milk, honey, fruit, pomegranates and celery and olives are all praised in the Bible. So for Christians, at least, that's why I asked you in DM if this was if you want to get into the religious aspect, a Christian vegan to me is a very interesting thing, because the Bible has so much positive things to say about meat, and so does the Quran and the Torah, which the Bible contains the Torah. So a follower of an Abrahamic religion, I'm shocked when I meet one who's a vegan or vegetarian, because I wonder if did you think God got dietary advice wrong? But again,
That's fine.
it might be a side trail.
Yeah, I'm not inclined to go down that with our limited time that we have left. But how how do you get to talking about evolutionary evidence if we don't believe in evolution?
Oh, I was trying to find some common ground. I do believe in some macro evolution. I know creatures adapt to their surroundings. I don't believe in microevolution. I don't believe that we came from fish or we came from single-celled organisms.
So, but you don't.
Plus young Earth theory, like I think Earth's about 10,000 years old, so I can't fit it in even if I did believe in it.
Right. Okay, so you're not saying that evolution is evidence for an animal-based diet being healthier?
No, I think I can argue it, but it's me being a visitor in a worldview that I'm not a resident in. I think Paul Saladino is not religious, so he argues it from that perspective. I know some of the people I follow do as well. So I know the position. It's not my position, but I think it also conforms to the reality that we see around us.
Okay. I think I'll resist going down that pathway. I mean, again, I don't think
there's like 16 cans of worms there.
yeah. There's too much. There's way too much there. I think is I would encourage you afterwards to do some of the looking at the evidence. Like, if it was the case that the healthiest diet is going to be the one with the best bioavailability and the best nutrient density and the least ultra processed foods and so on, then we would see, if we look at big cohorts of people over a long period of time, oh, look at that, the people who are eating the nutrient dense red meat with bioavailable nutrients tend to be living the longest, right? We'd see that, right? But we actually see the opposite of that. So I would encourage you to engage with the evidence a little bit, and just, again, you seem like you're going to be pretty motivated by
longevity is my North Star,
right?
Health
Like by
North
health.
Star.
It's just an odd decision to be eating a ton of red meat if that is the case.
Again, you keep treating evidence and studies as synonyms. I would say studies are a subset of evidence. Just like all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, right?
Yeah, but there's really no evidence for an animal-based diet being healthier. You have kind of like theories, right?
There's few studies. Yeah, there's few studies. Fewer studies.
Wouldn't you think that we would have a ton of studies showing that, if it was the case that red meat, the bioavailable, the nutrient-dense red meat is the healthiest food? Wouldn't you think there'd be a ton of studies showing that meat eaters live longer?
Absolutely not. No.
Why not?
Almost all studies are funded.
Sure.
And so there's no reason to fund a study proving the moon exists. If you're right and if you get people to agree with you, you haven't made any profit, right? So there's no agenda, there's no profit-driven agenda there. So there's a reason that there's so many rich Americans that have ruined the world. And so I apologize on behalf of Americans to the rest of the world. I think we have a largely international audience here. I'm sorry for people like Bill Gates and et cetera. Yeah, I'm highly invested in buying up all the farmland, and highly interested in eugenics. I won't say if he's invested in eugenics or not, but he's highly interested in population control and reducing human imprint on the planet and a plant-based diet. He does not talk often about human thriving or longevity or human health. And I think he's putting his money where his mouth is. And I think a lot of these studies are funded by individuals like that. You don't need a study to prove the moon exists. You don't need a study to prove that plants carry a much higher toxic load than, that vegetables carry a much higher toxic load than animal products do, which is near zero. You don't need studies to prove that because you just have biology and chemistry. You don't need studies to prove gravity exists or the moon exists.
The thing is, the statements that you're saying, like plants carry a toxic load, presumably you think that's relevant because you're making the inference that they're unhealthy to eat, right?
That is correct as you could be. I do believe humans should not eat toxins.
But doesn't it concern you that the people who are eating more plants are living longer?
I
You think
I
that's not
believe there
true
are
because
some
it's a Bill
studies that
Gates funded
have
study.
shown results similar to what you just said. Yes.
But doesn't that concern you?
It does not. In my brain, there's a spectrum of bad diets to healthy diets, and I think a full vegetarian diet, like a Brian Johnson extremist. You're familiar with Brian Johnson? Trying to
No.
live forever. Oh, okay. Well, he's plant-based only. He takes like 100 supplements a day. He's got like 6 wearables always on him. Like he's trying to live forever. I think you might actually appreciate following him. He's a vegetarian or perhaps a vegan. I forget. He's trying to live forever. He looks like a vampire. He does not ever go in the sun. But I think he's very focused on health, which I applaud to no end. I do think a vegetarian diet is far superior, and the reason I've led with my story, I think a vegetarian diet is far superior to a standard American diet or a diet full of UPF. And so in my mind, the spectrum is the worst thing you can do is eat fake food. Better thing you can do is eat whole food, plants. Best thing you can do is eat a whole food omnivore diet with a strong prejudice for animal products. So I think a lot of the studies where they fall short is they compare people who are eating trash like McDonald's meat and hot dogs full of, binders and emulsifiers and stabilizers and preservatives and dyes. They compare that to eating a vegetarian diet. I would expect to see the vegetarians versus the standard UPF diet. I would expect the vegetarians and the vegans to have better outcomes when you compare those two. But again, we don't have long-term RCTs comparing whole foods or even better, whole animal products or even better grass-fed, grass-finished the way animal products should be. We don't have any RCTs or many at least because those are all small family farms. There's no such thing as a big grass-fed, grass-finished beef, big pasture-raised ruminant. It doesn't exist definitionally. And so, yeah, there's a lot of studies with the plant agenda. There's a lot of studies with the big beef and big CAFO agenda that are funded. And there's not a lot of studies done by farmers who I better think who are trying to do calving season right now. I don't have time for that. So yeah, that's the spectrum in my mind. I would agree wholeheartedly. Here's a concession for your audience. Vegetarianism, veganism, far better than the standard American diet, far better than processed food. That's better. That's superior because it's whole food. It's closer to what we are designed or what we have in us is designed to consume things, and whole foods are better than processed foods. And then I just go the next step and say whole animal foods are superior to vegetables. Does that make sense? I'm not asking you if you agree. Do you understand the 3 stops on the train track?
I understand what you're saying, but it's just not scientifically rigorous. It's just again, it's very much just.
Well, presumably you would agree whole food is better than processed food, or do we disagree there?
Not necessarily. No, I think this is another one of these vibes-based things for, I'll say, animal-based dieters or animal-based advocates.
Interesting.
Well,
the onus is on you then, because processed foods hardly existed until 100 years ago, and humans became the dominant species on Earth on a whole food diet. So I'm curious for your defense of why processed foods are even on a level playing field, let alone better than. Like we conquered the planet on a whole food diet.
Yeah, well, if you look at again, if you randomize people, you have half of them eating red meat and you have half of them eating plant-based meat alternatives, which are going to count as ultra-processed foods. The people who are eating the plant-based meat alternatives have lower LDL cholesterol, lower TMOs, and lower body
Science.
weight. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
I bet I would lose weight too and shed muscle and shed bone mass if I went to a plant-based diet, a vegetable-based diet.
Well, you would also probably lower your LDL cholesterol, which at the moment you're like treating as if it's a high score, basically, with your current diet. Yeah, I mean,
do you know what my LDL is? Do you want to take a guess?
Why don't you tell me?
Well, 222. Every time I do a blood draw, and I get my biomarkers twice a year, every time I do a blood draw, I get the red icon next to my LDL. Not treating it like a high score per se. I'm trying to inflate. That's a funny way to put it. But I am not worried that I fit the lean mass hyper-responder body type. I think there's now we're getting to physiology there. But your joke about high LDL is absolutely on point. I recognize I have it. I disagree that it's a problem.
Wow.
Plaque is a problem.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so much evidence that LDL cholesterol is a problem, but I fear that if I start talking about the evidence, it's science and it's corrupt and it's Bill Gates funded, and like, I don't know how you can live your life without considering scientific evidence. Like,
we did it for over 10,000 years of recorded human history. We did it without studies.
Yeah, and we spent most of that time naked, dying at 30 with rotting teeth. Like, this is not a way to optimize the human experience. If you're gonna like reject modern medicine and stuff like this, like, I don't know,
Chris,
I think that vaccines
you gotta
are
refine
cut
that,
and
man.
fucking
You just said 3
cancer
fake things in a
treatment
row,
is
dude.
cut.
Hold on. No, we didn't spend most of the last 10,000 years naked. All of the human history we have shows that humans overwhelmingly prefer clothing to non-clothing. No, teeth didn't rot and fall out. All the evidence we have is terrific teeth before the advent of sugar-laden everything. I forget what your middle thing was, but I think you need to refine that point, Chris. Naked and rotting teeth does not describe the majority of human history.
Listen,
the rotting teeth all started since the 1940s and 1950s when sugar became a household product.
Listen, there's gonna be people living longer than they were when we were knocking around, well, up to 10,000 years ago on your view.
Let's say recorded human history.
Recorded human history, sure. People are living longer now because we have access to modern medicines, we have access to science-based dietary guidance.
But how did we even live long enough to propagate at age 16, 18, 20? Without processed foods? How do we dominate the planet as a species on a whole food only diet for millennia? Was it a cosmic joke or an accident?
You can have factors in your biology that make you live long enough to reproduce and become disadvantageous in your older age. Like, you've got there, you've reproduced, you've passed along your genes for better or worse, and you've getting to the stage where you're going to be
worse.
You're going to be wanting to look at health outcomes in terms of what are going to be the likely things to kill you now.
Mm-hmm.
And overconsumption of red processed meat is certainly going to be one of them.
But humans ate red meat for millennia, and heart disease and heart attacks almost did not exist until the 1950s. When Eisenhower had a heart attack at age 50, Americans were shocked because a man so young got a heart attack. It almost did not exist. Inuit do not suffer heart attacks. East African herdsmen do not suffer heart attacks. It doesn't happen. It is the advent of ultra-processed food, standard American diet, sugar and dyes and everything, high carbs, that has led to these catastrophes of everyone's got diabetes, 2-year-olds are obese, and insulin resistant, teeth are rotting out. It is not due to eating plants or eating meat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You're just wrong. Like, there's the scientific evidence is very
I'm not
clear.
wrong about heart disease barely existed before 1950. We don't need studies to prove that. We just need the history books.
It could well be the case that people are not living long enough. They're dying of other causes because we didn't have as much medicine that prolonged their life long enough to get heart attacks, right?
Maybe.
But now we do. And the biggest killer. Well, not really. I mean,
well, you changed what you said, Chris.
Well, how did I change what I said?
You said red meat leads to higher incidence of heart attacks and
heart disease,
that. And it barely existed prior to 1950 in humanity. I don't know about other species.
Well, those two things could both be true, right? It could be the case that for other interventions like modern medicine, we're now able to live long enough to get heart attacks, whereas before we're dying from like predation in caveman times or something like that, right? Like before we have antibiotics, people are just dying from everyday infections that now are trivial.
Sure.
Now we have these medicines. We're living long enough. We're living into our
So you're
70s
calling it a
and 80s.
coincidence, right? That's what you're saying. It's most likely a coincidence in the scientific term.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm just saying that
okay.
we've solved for other causes of death. You and I live in the year 2026. We are going to probably live. I'll probably live into my 80s or longer, and
I'm aiming for centenarian.
I would really put down the red meat then if I were you, because you are gonna be increasing your risk of heart attack and cancer. I mean, that like nobody is going to tell you otherwise, apart from fucking Sean Baker. Like seriously, there's not, and you know this guy even says as well. Like we were listening to him on debate the other day saying I actually might stop advocating for carnivore diet unless I start seeing some better evidence for it. And that there really is no evidence to support the health benefits of carnivore diet in the long term. So, I mean,
you mean
just
studies?
Sure.
Studies are one form of evidence. You can't disagree with that, Chris. Studies and evidence aren't synonyms. Evidence is a category. Studies are a subset of that category. Just like history, biology, chemistry, studies. These are all forms of evidence. You have to recognize that, dude.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but you're kind of implying that these things are on the same level. Like they're just not.
I'm not saying which is superior to which, but I'm saying they are each subsets of a category. The category is evidence. Studies are a subset of that category. I'm not saying studies are better than history or worse. I'm not saying chemistry is better than biology or worse.
Well, I don't think
subsets of the category.
I don't think that the arguments that you're presenting could be called evidence, frankly, because I mean, you have theory and you have evidence, and you're talking about
what evidence
theory.
exists besides studies. So you've made it clear studies are evidence. Check. What else is there besides studies in your world that counts as evidence?
Well, I'm saying that evidence is like empirical observations of some facts.
Observations. Aha. Okay.
And
are all observations studies, or can those be two different things?
Yeah, of course. You could have some. Of course, yes, of course. I grant that you can have some things that could be called evidence which are not written in scientific studies. Of course.
Okay.
But the thing that I'm distinguishing between is evidence and theory. And theory is like a story about why things might be a certain way, but without any empirical observations, right? So, like the seatbelt example that I gave, I could have a theory that it's safer to drive without a seatbelt because maybe you're going to drive more carefully and be less likely to get into an accident.
Mm-hmm.
That's a theory. That's not evidence.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm saying the same thing for your arguments about bioavailability and about nutrient density and about ultra processing and about evolution. These are all theories. They're stories. They're not empirical observations of anything. They're not evidence.
So, Chris, yes or no? Plants carry a toxin load. Vegetables carry a toxin load. I sent you the WHO report 2 weeks ago and then an hour ago.
Yeah, but
do you
I don't
agree
think
or disagree with the WHO, the WHO, an organization I hate and I do not trust.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Correct. Do you agree or disagree with the dozens of phytochemicals, alkalines, myotoxins, and carcinogens that are identified in seeds and vegetables that the WHO has reported on? Or do you think that was wrong, that report of theirs?
I think what you're saying is correct, but I think that you think that it means something that it doesn't mean.
All I'm asking is if you agree with the WHO's report. Again, I am biased against them. I have every reason to say the WHO is wrong. And I'm saying in this article, they published good science. They reported on the facts correctly. Do you agree that they reported on those facts correctly and that plants carry a toxic load? I'm not even saying it's a big one or a little one. I'm not saying it's meaningful or unmeaningful. Do plants?
Well, I am saying it's not meaningful. Like,
wait, so you're saying exists, there is a toxic load, but it's not meaningful to human health, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I understand.
And this is the problem with so much of the carnivore stuff. Like, there can be selective things which are like technically true, like fiber is not an essential nutrient was one of the things we have written down. We didn't get to like most of the points that we were going to discuss, honestly. there can be things that are true in a narrow
part
sense.
2, man. Happy to do a part 2.
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Ban me for life. That's also fine.
Absolutely not. No, this would be, I'd do a part 3. I think that there can be these like statements and sound bites which are true in a very narrow sense, like fiber is not an essential nutrient, right? There's a very narrow definition of essential nutrient where humans can't synthesize it, and you'll have a specific deficiency disease if you don't have enough of it. And fiber doesn't meet that narrow definition. But it's still the case that if you eat more fiber, you're going to reduce your risk of getting colorectal cancer. That's not in contrast with the statement fiber is not an essential nutrient. So there are these like very narrow, deliberately misleading statements that people will make. And look, I'm not saying that you're being deliberately misleading. Honestly, I think that you've probably been misled. And I don't mean that in a patronizing way.
I prefer that insult over the other one. I'm definitely not trying to mislead anyone out of ill intent. If I am misleading people, it's out of sincere ignorance.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said it, not me.
Hey man, I'm a fair truth broker here. If I find better truth, I pick it up and throw away the old one.
That's what I'm hoping for you, because again, like, I think that the diet that you're following and the diet that you're giving to your family and your kids is going to increase all of your risk of dying young. And it's not, for me, I wouldn't be satisfied to say like, well, evolutionary and bioavailability and nutrient density in the face of overwhelming empirical evidence that eating higher amounts of red meat is going to increase your risk of dying young. And I hope that you can kind of pick this up in a way that you don't feel as biased. Again, obviously, you're talking to a vegan. You probably think that I'm going to be presenting it in a biased way, and maybe the study's biased and so on. Like,
of course, it's unavoidable that we carry bias. If I switch to veganism tomorrow, I would be a biased vegan. If I remain, an animal-based guy tomorrow, I'm a biased animal-based guy. Everyone has bias. There's no one who's above bias. It's not possible.
Sure. But nevertheless, some things are true and some things are not true.
100%.
And in this case, it is in fact true that consuming more red meat is going to make you more likely to die young of heart disease and cancer.
How did we become the dominant species on this planet, as animal eaters? It's truly a modern miracle.
It's just not the dunk that you think it is saying that. Like, these things are just not going to trump empirical evidence. Like, there would be some evidence, right?
I would say they are evidence. They're not going to trump studies, which I think I would agree with the statement. They're not going to trump studies. I think I would agree with you on that if you said it that way.
I don't think it's even evidence for your claim, like, even in a broad sense of the word evidence. I don't think it's evidence that we ate meat during our evolutionary history. I don't think that's evidence for animal-based diets are optimal for human health today. Like, we also ate a ton of sugar during our evolutionary history, right?
Seasonally, rarely humans ate fruit off the tree and then learned to agriculture and learned to domesticate wild fruits. And I definitely wouldn't say a ton of sugar. Sugar is 100x'd in the last 100 years, sugar consumption.
We have a bunch of things that were going on in our evolutionary history which are not commensurate with optimal health in the year 2026, where we have sedentary office jobs and like access
staring
to
at screens.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I mean, look, it could have been the case that there's times in our evolutionary history, it almost certainly was the case. There's times in our evolutionary history where it would have been totally beneficial to be eating animal products and to be able to have animal products and to have the biological mechanisms to be able to like get nutrients from animal products and everything else, because you might be going a week now without any food, so you better eat as much of that mammoth as you can fit, right? And none of us are living past 30, so it doesn't really matter about the risk of heart disease. But that's not the world we live in anymore. We've got supermarkets, we've got a reliable source of food. We don't need to be thinking about like a anti-starvation diet. The risks that are probably going to kill us are completely different today than they were in our evolutionary history. And so we should be eating a diet that's appropriate for managing those risks. And if you look at what the biggest killers are, it's heart disease and cancer. So
correct. That's a fact.
Right. So you would want to be looking at the foods that are going to reduce your chances of getting heart disease and cancer. And I have a bit of hope for you, Matt, because as like a lifespan maxer, I do think that
I like that label. That sounds
yeah,
cool.
it
I'll wear
does.
that one.
Good. Right. Good. And I want you to live a long and healthy life as well. And I want the same for your family. And I don't want Jordan Peterson and Paul Saladino to lead you down a path of like some sort of mostly red meat diet, which, again, I feel like I sound like a broken record at this point, is going to increase your chances of dying young from heart disease and cancer.
Even though it never happened for 10,000 years, you're saying it could happen today. I mean,
yes,
I
because
understand.
we're dying at 30 of starvation.
I mean, I understand that black swan events happen. I've read Talib's book, so I understand that things do change dramatically, and new evidence does arrive. But I would just need overwhelming evidence, that consuming foods containing toxins is superior to consuming foods that do not. Like, there's one of the things I haven't said
Fortunately,
yet.
we have such.
We're short on time. I will ask you directly.
Mm-hmm.
Are you aware of there are elements in vegetables that have been identified as carcinogens, carcinogens, toxins, etc. Has there ever been a single element of red meat identified as a carcinogen or a toxin? And the answer is no.
This is going to be another one of these tricky like phrases that might be true in a narrow sense, but is just not aligned with the.
I'm not asking if it's broadly true or narrowly true. I'm just asking. They say red meat consumption leads to a higher risk of cancer. Is it because of something in the red meat? And the answer is no. There's no inherent chemicals or properties in red meat that are carcinogenous. Man, that's a mouthful. And there are those chemicals and those properties inherent in vegetables, not fruits.
But then why do people?
We have strong alignment on fruits. I love fruit.
but then why do people have higher rates of cancer when they eat more red meat?
I'm glad you finally asked that. From what I can see, what few studies I do get into, they compare people eating processed meat, low quality meat, against people eating high quality whole foods.
Yeah,
like hot dogs are probably worse than broccoli for human health. Actually, I would go as far as to say hot dogs are worse than broccoli for human health. McDonald's is definitely worse than kale, 100%.
Yes, but so is ribeye.
But it's not inherent to the food, so it has to be behavioral. It's not inherent in the food itself, whereas it's inherent in seeds, stems, leaves, bark, roots.
I don't know what you mean by inherent, but people who are eating more red meat are more likely to get
genetic.
Cancer. That's what
it is inherent. There are chemicals in vegetables that cannot be removed. Sorry, naturally. They can be removed unnaturally through processing. There are inherent chemicals and inherent properties in vegetables that are toxic and carcinogenous, and there are not in red meat.
But then we should see people eating more vegetables getting more cancer. And we don't see that. We see the opposite.
It's not vegetables are causing it. The ultra processed foods are greatly amplifying it. So again, this is an argument against.
You just said the processing can remove the cancer-causing chemicals.
I said it's possible. I mean, I don't want to insult your life's work, man. I'm sure it's possible. I know cooking reduces toxic load. So what's processing, but more and more clever and more technologically advanced forms of cooking. But there's never been a single carcinogenic element or toxic element identified inherent in red meat the way it is in vegetables. I keep saying plants. I mean to say vegetables. And so it has to be behavioral. There's no other way around it until someone identifies something toxic or carcinogenous in red meat. And they've been looking for decades. There's billions of dollars hunting those down. They can't find it yet. Call it element X, call it chemical X, whatever you want to call it. That hasn't been identified. And the WHO has listed dozens of them identified in vegetables.
I don't know what the thing is what the particular chemical is in cigarettes that causes you cancer. And yet
it's arsenic.
Cigarettes cause cancer.
Yeah, it's
okay,
arsenic.
Sure. But I mean, even if nobody knew that, we could look at data and go, hey, people smoking seem to get cancer more frequently, don't they? And it wouldn't be an argument to say, well, what's the specific chemical in cigarette? Like, say that was impossible to find, or like it's a variety of things, or whatever it may be. Like, it would nevertheless be true that
Correct.
people smoking more cigarettes are more likely to get cancer, right? So it doesn't really matter
Correct.
that you can point
the studies didn't prove or didn't create the cancer, and it wasn't that humans cannot understand the cancer exists without studies. The studies reflect reality.
Unless they're
right?
cucked,
So if,
Bill Gates funded studies, right?
or funded by Marlboro, like the many studies that tobacco companies funded. Right. So the studies do not make reality. They reflect reality, or they reflect bias and unreality and outright propaganda, whatever. They reflect. They don't create. So it's the fact that arsenic is always bad for humans to ingest. There's arsenic in cigarettes. We don't need studies to prove arsenic is bad for humans. We have biology that informs us there.
But if there was some component, pardon me, if there was some component in, for example, vegetables that we think, hey, this is a cancer-causing chemical, that's just not relevant unless we see evidence that consuming those vegetables increases your incidence of cancer, right?
If we're talking about reality and long-term RCTs, I think I could agree with what you just said. I guess I could with great trepidation agree that if it was proven that eating certain carcinogens did not lead to higher cancer incidences, I guess I would be very hesitantly okay with consuming carcinogens. I guess I'm coming at this from a position of it's impossible to consume a high level of toxins without being intoxified. It's impossible to regularly consume carcinogens without generating cancers. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But again, at best, then what you've done is you've brought plants up to equal playing field with red meat. And I don't see, that's a big gap to say it's okay to eat carcinogens at a low level or toxins at a low level. It's fine. I'm very hesitant, and that's the most diplomatic term I can use to describe how I feel about eating toxins or eating known carcinogens.
Don't you think that it's I don't know if they were known carcinogens.
You keep saying if, like you don't believe the WHO. I just have to bring that up. You say it like you don't believe them. And that's fine.
Well,
I don't believe most of what they say too. Don't believe the WHO.
Look, I'm sure that whatever, I haven't looked at that source that you've sent me, frankly. I'm sure that what they've said in there is narrowly true, but the relevant question is, does eating vegetables give you cancer, right?
I don't think so.
Why are you concerned about consuming carcinogens if they don't give you cancer?
Because Chris, a very important virtue of me is that I don't want to consume carcinogens or toxins. Like that's a very important virtue of my diet and just worldview in general. I don't like drinking motor oil.
But why not if you don't think there's any negative health effects?
Well, I don't think eating a stick of carrot or eating a head of broccoli or eating a handful of grapes, I don't think you're going to get cancer from that. I do think increasing your toxic load, increasing the amount of carcinogens and phytochemicals and alkaloids, the other dozens of things listed in that WHO article that are proven, known, they're beyond debate. We don't need a debate if there are toxins in plants. I think the more you eat them, the more you're courting with disaster. And I think it's one of the reasons that pure vegans, vegetarians, and I always get them confused, so forgive me. I forget one allows like eggs and dairy and one does not. I think it's why you can measure things like bone mass, muscle strength, neuroreceptivity, firing in the brain. One of the things vegans and vegetarians get to avoid because they don't eat a lot of processed grains is I do believe have lower incidences of diabetes. I think that's been provably true because they're not eating all the processed junk. So that's one thing. If diabetes is your main enemy and you want to do whatever it takes to avoid diabetes, plant-based diet, not a bad way to go, because diabetes is in effect it's generated from high carb intake, especially simple carbohydrates, far worse than complex carbohydrates.
What if you want to avoid heart disease and cancer?
Say what? Oh, eat a lot of red meat, drink a lot of water, get a lot of sunlight, grounding.
Sunlight as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
I know Brits struggle to get the amount of sun that y'all need, that your bodies were designed for and evolved for. But it's still possible.
Do you believe in sun cream, apropos of nothing?
Like sunscreen in the
Yeah.
US. Yeah, sun cream. I put it on my 1 and 2-year-olds. I'm not sure I should, but I don't wear it.
Okay. I'm glad you're putting on your kids at least.
Don't worry, I'll stop when they're 3 or 4.
Wow. I mean,
Surely you don't wear it in the cloudy, gray island that you live on.
I do when it's sunny. I mean, so there's yeah.
If I lived in a mountain or at high latitudes where the atmosphere is thinner, I might consider wearing it more often for like long-term exposure. But yeah, I guess what's ancestral adjacent. I definitely believe that our bodies are unconscious during the night and conscious during the day, and I believe in the circadian rhythm. I think these are, yeah. But again, I think it's beyond the point of this conversation here, and I'm being a bad guest because now we're over on time.
Well, no worries. Yeah, I don't want to keep you all day either, but yeah,
let your audience know Matt is a animal-based guy. He loves fruits. He loves animals. He eats both every day. Yeah. I'm not just some meathead Instagram bro, because I don't even have Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. If you want to follow me, you got to hit me up on LinkedIn, because that's the only social site I'm on.
Meatheads.
Or I meet great
LinkedIn,
people like
bro.
Chris.
Yeah.
And then you'll see my LinkedIn headline, and you will, throw up a little bit in your mouth.
All right. Well, so perhaps we can both kind of give like a bit of a closing statement and then close it out.
Sure. You want to go first?
Yeah, I guess so. I would just say that the arguments for an animal-based diet being healthier are all to do with stories about why that might be the case. So we can talk about stories about human physiology, we can talk about stories about evolution or cellulose or a bunch of other things that we've heard about, bioavailability, nutrient density. But when we come to looking, actually observing what are the health effects of consuming one type of diet or another, the evidence is overwhelming that a plant-based diet is going to be associated with superior health outcomes. And again, I don't think that, well, first of all, I don't think there's really been any attempts to refute that. I don't think that there is an adequate way of dealing with that. If you want to argue for an animal-based diet, it really is just based at the story level and not looking at any kind of human health outcomes. And yeah, I think that it would be a good thing if, again, it's very accessible to do now, and anyone can go and speak to ChatGPT or other Perplexity or whatever your chosen LLM is that is not going to have the biases that you might be worried about in a conversation with another human, and say, look, am I increasing my risk of dying of heart disease and cancer by eating red meat all the time? And it's going to tell you overwhelmingly, yes, you are. I think it's admirable that you're concerned with maximizing your own health and the health of your family, but I think honestly, I'm annoyed with a lot of the influencer culture now that is spreading all of the carnivore stuff, because you have people like my opponent in this debate who are completely led down the garden path of these vibes and looking at evolution and bioavailability or whatever else, and will people who are concerned with improving their own health are now eating loads of red meat. It's mental. And there just needs to be a total reset on this, because anyone who's listening to this who understands scientific evidence will understand the overwhelming evidence is that plant-based diets are associated with better health outcomes. And people can make their own decisions about what to eat and so on, but this is the impacts of the meat influencer trend, right? You have people who have various degrees of either paid directly by meat industry to spout their talking points, or who are just recreating that, and is leading to people who are, again, concerned with their own health, which not everybody is, now thinking that it's a good idea to eat loads of steak and red meat all the time and feed the same to their kids. Like, it is shocking the kind of outcomes that we're seeing now with the health influencer culture and the spreading of the meat industry talking points on these issues. So I'll leave it there, and I'll let you say a few words to close out as well, Matt.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of that was fair. I think some of it was not, and the listeners know which parts I disagree with, but I appreciate the conversation. I really do. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to do a part 2 if you would like that. One big thing me and Chris agreed on is that there are no long-term RCTs, random controlled trials, I keep saying RCS, that show how a plant-based diet or a vegan diet is superior to whole food carnivore, whole food omnivore for human longevity. I would love I would love to be a participant in that study. There's a lot of talks about how that would be unethical. If someone to this show is listening and wants a group B, you've got one willing guy who's willing to do a 50-year study in it. And if I die at 50, that says something. If I die at 100, that says something else. Humans, though, I will go back to where I see Chris is strongest. Obviously, we agree on fruits. Fruits are great for humans. People should eat more fruit. Obviously, we agree on cages, and CAFOs are bad. We didn't ever discuss CAFOs. It's a huge problem in the U.S., which has much more land than the U.K. does. And it's terrible. CAFOs are disastrous for human metabolic health. They're disastrous for the environment. I'm pro-meat, but I'm not on board with the private equity-driven mass production of low-quality meat. And I think that's one of the reasons that we do see some studies that genuinely seem to infer that some meat consumption is inferior to some plant consumption diets. I agree with Chris that some studies do seem to reflect the reality that some whole food diets are superior to the standard American diet and to a lot of ultra processed food diets. Where our disagreement, of course, comes in is, like I said, I don't think studies and evidence are synonyms. I firmly agree that studies and observational science are one form of evidence alongside of biology, chemistry, physics, human history. I've done a lot of Socratic method. I am a liberal arts major. I forgot to ask, so it was impolite of me, Chris, what you got your PhD in. I know you got a PhD. You have a PhD, so I apologize for that. I'm a liberal arts major, and so of course I come at this from a Socratic method, first principles, logic, and philosophy perspective, and I'm absolutely willing to yield the field on. I'm not a scientist, not a nutritionist, but I do understand history, biology, chemistry, and I would push back on the label that history is vibes and biology is vibes. I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, Chris. I really have, and I'm glad that we're able to talk here. I also think most of the same things about you that you think about me. I think you are focused on health. I think that's your North Star. I think you'd be willing to set aside. You don't strike me as a guy that's an ideologue or arguing in bad faith. Like, I think you would change your position if you saw better evidence. I don't think you would keep your position and ignore better evidence. So that's a compliment. I hope you take it as a compliment. And I look forward to keeping in touch on LinkedIn and beyond, wherever our paths intersect.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and you were real good support throughout, so I really do appreciate it, and hopefully we get the chance to speak again.
Likewise. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. All right, dude. You take care.
Take care. Bye.
Well, there you go.